Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Did the wife's lover just confess like that, or was there some kind of confrontation? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. He sent Mindy a text saying that he and Lisa had talked and she might need to talk to Robert soon. Gabriella called and said he could stay with them. He thanked her for her generous offer but declined. Surprisingly, or not, Lisa called only the day after she was given her documents. He did not answer the phone. Her voicemail said that she was sorry and begged him to come back and give her another chance. This will not happen, he thought. His sister's family did everything they could to lift his spirits, and sometimes he almost felt human instead of empty and burned out inside. The time spent there was well used, as it allowed him to understand his next steps. Fortunately, the Houston Fire Inspection Team determined that the explosion was caused by an old stove connected to an old gas pipe in an old house. The owner should have checked the pipe before starting repairs. A few days later, he returned to Houston to do one last thing before leaving. At the same time as the other day, he found the same orderly smoking on his break. After paying $100, they made an agreement, and Zach went inside. When he saw the orderly leave the room, he entered. Gerald was conscious. Zach stood at the foot of the bed so he could be seen. Zach asked, "Can you hear me, or do I need to write on this board?" He brought a small whiteboard with him in case he needed it. Gerald replied, "My ears are still ringing, but I can hear you." Zach asked, "Do you know who I am?" Gerald said, "I know." Zach pointedly turned off his phone and said, "I'm not recording this. It's between us. I'll take off my shirt to prove it if I have to." Gerald said, "It's not necessary. It's not a big deal." Zach said, "I won't take up much of your time. First of all, why? Why Lisa, even after she got married?" Zach watched as Gerald tried to laugh but winced in pain. "Great. Why? You've got to be kidding. The why is simply because she's gorgeous and a great, but you probably know that. If her marriage didn't bother her, it didn't bother me either." Zach had to muster all his strength not to break his neck with his bare hands. Zach asked, "Do you love her?" Gerald replied, "No. I care about her, but we don't mean anything to each other." "Indeed. Last question, why did you take her music away?" "She plays great." Gerald said, "Of course she plays, she has real talent. But she relies too much on what others think about her music. If she's not willing to play regardless of what others think, then she shouldn't play. At least those whom I criticize return to the stage and play." Lisa fell off her horse and did not get back on it. If she is so easily influenced by others, she should not be doing this. Zach was stunned. "But you know what this means to her, and you didn't encourage her?" "Listen, I'm not encouraging anyone. If she wants to quit, that's her right. So, even though she could have been great, to you she was just another lover?" "Just another lover." "Oh no, as you probably know, she was an amazing lover, and that's why I wanted to keep dating her." This scoundrel had the audacity to grin at Zach. But Zach had one last move. He said, "Enjoy life in a wheelchair, you an idiot." Now it was Zach's turn to smirk as he walked out of the room. He got what he wanted. Entering the visitor's lounge, he sat down. A few minutes later, an orderly came in and handed him a small voice recorder. Zach checked that the conversation was recorded and left the hospital. He had dinner with Sam and Gabriella at their home. It was a very modest home, considering that they owned a successful business that employed nearly 200 people, mostly technical staff. When they could have driven Mercedes, they drove Toyotas. They wanted to know how he was feeling. He said it was good that he was not in prison and that an alibi was not needed, otherwise, he felt empty. Sam said, "Your brother and sister-in-law must love you very much for him to take the risk of impersonating you at immigration." Zach nodded. "They love me. I'm lucky to have a family." He then looked at Gabriella and said, "Including both of you." They enjoyed their time together, but the mood was melancholic as Zach was leaving Houston, and no one knew for how long. Before leaving, he hugged Gabriella and said, "I love you, Mrs. Ortiz. Thank you both for everything." "I love you too, Zachary." Don't stay too long." As he left their house, Cassandra returned. They greeted each other warmly, as they sometimes bumped into each other at work. Her father was hugging her mother, and she could see her mother struggling to hold back her emotions. Before leaving, Zach also received a call from Robert. Mindy had told him everything. Robert apologized for Mindy's involvement and thanked Zach for insisting, or rather, demanding, that Mindy tell him the truth. It would be difficult for them for a while, but they were determined to correct this mistake and improve their marriage. He spent his last night in Houston at his parents' house. Daniel, Gina, and their 2 children joined them. As they left that evening, Daniel said, "Zach, I know you need to go away for a while, and I understand that, but you have to come back, brother. It's going to be hard for all of us without you. So promise me you'll come back, okay?" "I promise I'll be back. I just need some time," Zach said. He hugged them, and they left the next day. For Zach, the adventure began with a new position in Munich, Germany, where a company was developing new converters. He would be more involved in testing and improving the converters as they were developed, as well as in developing manufacturing capabilities. Additionally, he would serve as the European MRI engine expert and part-time salesperson for McDye. There was plenty of MRI service work throughout Europe, especially in Germany, where the concentration was high. Zach spent the first week in a hotel while he looked for short-term rental accommodation. He found a nice 2-room apartment near the city center, which allowed him to get lost in the crowds of business people and tourists. It was mid-August, and there were a lot of tourists. After settling in, he took a few days to explore Munich and much of Bavaria. After a few weeks in his apartment, he began to wonder if he had made a mistake. He felt terribly alone. Sometimes he told himself that if he had stayed in Houston or anywhere else, he would still feel lonely. Loneliness was accompanied by pain. He knew or was told that it would pass with time, but he wondered how people dealt with it until then. He video called his family from Houston, but it was difficult. They constantly encouraged him to go outside more, which he did sometimes, but he never felt comfortable. Something was missing. The people at the tech center, where the converter work was done, were friendly enough to invite him to join them several times. There was even a cute girl who sometimes went with them, but he couldn't muster the courage to ask her out. Besides, with his level of indecisiveness, he didn't want to be a boring date partner. At least his German was improving a little. Over 2 months later, when he arrived in Munich, October 1st began. He tried to enjoy the festivals with his colleagues, but his heart was not in it. As luck would have it, his brother called him and told him that the divorce was finalized and his old apartment was empty. As stated in the divorce, everything was removed from the apartment except for her violin, which she left behind. Lisa did not resist the divorce or the proposed agreement. From time to time, Lisa would call and leave messages on Zach's voicemail, saying she was sorry, but he never returned her calls. It appeared that after 6 weeks in the hospital, Gerald was discharged and moved to Austin to begin teaching. Due to his damaged hearing, he would never be able to criticize performances again. Lisa was also transferred to Austin to assist Gerald in his recovery. Hearing this news, Zach shook his head. So he simply existed for several months, waiting for the pain to subside. He hoped that one day he would feel well enough to end his self-imposed exile. Being in the center of Western Europe, he was close enough to drive or fly to various European cities on weekends. Instead of returning to Houston for Thanksgiving, he went to Barcelona. He discouraged his family from coming due to the possibility that he would be called in to repair the MRI. He did the same at Christmas. Instead of being hopeful, he found the thought of being with loved ones at Christmas unpleasant. Christmas in Munich was cold in every sense. His family, including Sam and Gabriella, called him on Christmas Day. Each woman was upset and worried. When the calls ended, the men were also concerned, though silently. In January, as he approached the 5-month mark in Munich, he received a call from Sam. They usually reviewed progress on the new converter every 2 weeks, but Sam had other plans for this call. After the usual progress review, Sam said, "Zach, I want you to start looking for your replacement. It's time for you to go home. While I want you to continue to lead the production of the new product, I have other tasks for you here." "Sam, I'm not sure I'm ready to go home." Gabriella has been pushing me to get you back for months now, and I've put it off as long as I could. You have no choice anymore. Zach laughed. I can imagine. She can be quite a persuasive woman when she puts her mind to something. Son, you have no idea. You've only seen a small part of what she's capable of. I swear, I think I spend half my time trying to keep her focused on the charity she's helping. Otherwise, she'd be meddling in everyone's lives all the time, children or company affairs. Sam, you wouldn't want it any other way. You're right. I wouldn't want to, but she misses you. Seriously, you helped us grow in this region enough to hire someone there full-time. I want you to find a replacement. If you need more time to return, then come to her and your parents. I'm sure they miss you too. You sound like my brother. Great minds and all that. Why don't you try setting up some face-to-face interviews in a month? I'll send Frank to help you conduct them and make the final hiring decision. If you want, I can talk to Demetrius and bring him in for the day. Demetrius was the CEO of a company that made the new sensors where Zach was allowed to work when he wasn't repairing MRIs or working with them on a plan to produce new sensors. I'll do it, Sam. I know you will take care, Zach. Zach worked with a local recruitment agency to help him test and select several candidates from across Europe. Then, using Skype, he and Frank conducted preliminary interviews with those who had the highest test scores. McDye planned to bring 4 or 5 candidates from this group to Munich for final interviews. On Thursday morning, a week before the scheduled interviews, Zach was working in one of the offices of a manufacturing company in Munich when he felt a soft hand on his shoulder. Hello, Zachariah. Zach was surprised to see a girl standing there. Cassie. I didn't know you were coming. What brings you here? Well, I could tell you the official version is that I've been asked to ask you to take me to Vienna. I have meetings there with our R&D partner early next week, and then I'll be back here midweek. Of course, we both know that this is complete nonsense. Although my meetings are real, I could fly to Vienna and spend a cold but wonderful weekend there myself, even though we already have 2 rooms booked. If you can't or don't want to come with me to Vienna, I can take the train, no problem. However, I'm told you're a travel expert and have spent some time in this region. If you want to spend what they say is a cold but wonderful 3-day weekend with someone who cares about you more than the people around here, then we should go together. They say Vienna is one of the most beautiful capitals in Europe. If you refuse, I will completely understand, although I have no doubt that my mother will not understand this. While I am abroad, I will forward all her calls to you. Zach remembered what Sam had said about interfering in his children's lives. Zach laughed. I'm guessing if I call Frank, he'll confirm that he or someone else is filling in for me today and tomorrow. Cassie smiled. Well, it's 3 in the morning in Houston, so if you want to call your boss, go ahead. But I don't think he'll be too happy to hear from you. Zach said, I'll give you one chance to refuse before I agree. Are you sure you want to do this? I can handle your mother, she said. Did I just say that? I had to say it. I can survive the consequences. I'm not sure you can handle it, but if I were completely against it, I wouldn't be here now. Do the girl a favor, okay? I know I'm not the most beautiful woman in the world, but it still hurts to be rejected. She made him laugh, and he thought it might be quite funny. She definitely wasn't her mother. We need to come to my place so I can pack for the weekend. It will only take a few minutes. I can get you to Vienna in 4 hours if we're in a hurry, or we can take the scenic route and stop for lunch at a stunning location. It's up to you. I'm at your disposal for the weekend, so I'll let you show me a good holiday. Mom gave us her ex to use this weekend, and I intend to make the most of it. Then it's definitely the scenic route. They took a taxi to his apartment. On the way, he asked, Have you eaten anything? How do you deal with jet lag? I grabbed a bagel and coffee on the way from the airport, so the food was fine. Thanks to your jet lag tips that you shared with your department, I went to bed a little earlier each night last week and took melatonin at the appropriate time before my flight, along with a mini bottle of tequila. I also took 2 packets of instant coffee to help me wake up on the plane, so everything seemed fine, although I was a little tired. Maybe I'll fall asleep in the car. Oh, I doubt it. Snow in the mountains must be beautiful. I'm sure you've seen mountains before, but after Flat Houston, this ride through the mountains will keep your attention. At least it did for me. He rented a car at the company's expense and made a reservation in advance for a late lunch at a restaurant she liked. His apartment wasn't anything special, but it was clear that he kept it clean even when he wasn't expecting guests. At that moment, only small compact cars or Mercedes E-Class vehicles were available at the car rental desk. They smiled at each other, put down Gabriella's Amex card, and chose a Mercedes. As Zach mentioned, instead of taking the direct route, they headed toward Salzburg but bypassed it and went to Hallstatt, one of the most picturesque lakeside villages in Austria. Above the city and lake is the Rudolf Sturm restaurant with breathtaking views of the snow-covered city and lake from its covered terrace. Zach's German was improving, but he was amazed when Cassie began speaking incredibly good German to the waitress, which improved service over speaking English. They heard several visitors speaking English and several other languages. "I didn't know you spoke German. There are probably a lot of things about me that you don't know. The two countries leading the way in research on the technology we want to use are the United States and Germany. I studied in Germany for 1 semester and had to work on my German." Zach thought that was quite impressive but began to realize that she was a remarkable person. Sitting next to Cassie and enjoying the view of the lake was not difficult. He always saw her well dressed, and her light makeup was always an improvement. Today, she was dressed for the weather, a nice heavy skirt and tights with what looked like a pair of riding boots. Her dark cashmere sweater was very flattering. She looked a lot like her mother, although she was slimmer. She had small breasts, wide hips, and was in good physical shape, unlike her mom. She wore her dark hair in loose, natural curls instead of pinned up like Gabriella. Instead of a sensual, sculpted face like Lisa's, her round face could be described as sweet and innocent, more like her mother's. As she said, she wasn't a stunning beauty, but he was married to a stunning beauty, and look where that got him. From a vantage point near the restaurant, they took a selfie with the city, lake, and snow-capped mountains in the background and sent it to her mother. Leaving the city, they took a more scenic and mountainous route to Vienna. He asked, "What will you do in Vienna?" She replied, "As I mentioned, I will be with our research and development partners. We are redesigning the transducer to be more sensitive than the current model you and our manufacturing partners are working on. You always have to work on the next model. Are you helping design the converter?" "Yes, but don't tell anyone. One of the reasons I studied in Germany was to research and get contacts of those who can help our company here. Only a few people in the company know about this." "But why keep it a secret? I thought you'd want everyone to know about it. If everything goes well, then everyone will know. As things stand now, many already think that Dad is going to transfer the company to me and my brother. We're trying to stay more reserved until we build a reputation for ourselves. My little brother Tom, whom you've known for a long time, is working on software to better visualize the images from each new transducer we test." Wow, a family business to be sure. She smiled because she knew something about him and the family business that he didn't. Yes, family business. Dad would like it to stay that way. Zach laughed and said, "I might work for you one day." She laughed too, thinking it would probably be the other way around. "You may see it that way, but Dad doesn't think so. He doesn't think you're working for him now. He prefers to think that you and a few other very carefully selected people are working with him. Everyone else works for you." Wow, don't be too surprised about me and the R&D team. I attended medical school and graduate school for almost 10 years. I started designing parts of the design myself while I was studying. I don't claim to be a super genius, but I am well educated. After 12 years of undergraduate and graduate school, including completion of medical school, I finally have my PhD. I'm betting that either my parents or my scholarships allowed me to spend over $500,000 on tuition. It was time to start putting this into practice. She clearly wasn't in the company just for show. They talked about the company, the industry, her biography, and education. They spent a lot of time talking about her mother, which was fun. Cassie admired her mother and loved her for who she was, but she was not her mother. She tried to adopt many of her mannerisms and grace, but her mother was much more reserved. Cassie was ready to call a spade a spade. Zach could tell she got it from Sam. Her mother might call it a garden tool or a shovel, depending on the delicacy of the situation. Up to this point, they had not discussed Zach's marriage or divorce. As they left the mountains and entered Vienna, she said, "You know, she misses you and is very worried about you." Zach chuckled. "Unfortunately, I have several women who miss and worry about me, my sister, my sister-in-law, my mother, and your mother." "I assume you're talking about your mom?" "Yes, exactly. I wish you wouldn't worry. I'm getting better. She would have come instead of me, but Mrs. K thought it would not look good. She is a married woman." They both laughed. "This looks so much like her now. She has forced you to be a sacrificial lamb or perhaps be your guide out of the labyrinth." He looked at her as she was looking out the window, or maybe she was just turning away from him. "Thank you, Cassie. The rest of the weekend could be a disaster, but I've already enjoyed today more than I have in months." It was absolutely true, but the conversation was getting too serious, so he said, "See, that in itself should prove to her that I'm getting better," although he knew that today was just a pleasant distraction. In the reflection of the car window, he saw her smile. They stayed at the Park Hyatt Vienna, where they each had a deluxe park suite for the long weekend, 2 luxurious rooms. After they got settled, they met at the concierge desk, found a nice restaurant, bought 2 skip-the-line tickets for the giant Ferris wheel, and booked a horse-drawn carriage ride for the evening. The evening was cold but beautiful, and from the top of the Ferris wheel, they sent Gabriella another photo of the 2 of them with Winter Vienna in the background. Gabriella was delighted with the photos she received, and it took all her self-control not to call them. She was more pleased than she could have imagined, but knew better than to interfere now. After all the planning and scheming with Sam over the past couple of months, she decided to wait and see how things would work out. "I hope Zach doesn't get any emergency calls for MRI repairs," she thought. She also needed to do charity work to take her mind off it, and she was able to do so, just barely. Zach and Cassie took advantage of a late evening carriage tour, snuggling together under a warm blanket with 2 large thermoses of rich hot chocolate. They used the time to plan the places they wanted to visit over the rest of the winter weekend. At the end of the evening, outside her hotel door, Zach received a hug, a kiss on the cheek, and a thank you for his efforts. On Saturday morning, after a sumptuous breakfast together in the hotel's beautiful restaurant, they planned their weekend with the concierge. She wanted to visit a couple of magnificent churches, as well as several palaces and markets. Zach said, "If you like cathedrals, there is one in Barcelona that I should show you." She smiled at him and replied, "Perhaps one day I will take you up on that promise." There were no mishaps with the MRI, and they enjoyed their weekend in Vienna. As predicted, it was quite cold, below 0 during the day, but the skies were exceptionally clear. They visited many beautiful and interesting places, including Stephansdom, the Kunsthistorisches Museum, Schönbrunn Palace, Belvedere Palace, Naschmarkt, and Café Central, to name a few. Every evening, he received a hug and a kiss on the cheek for his efforts. Zach bought her a snow globe to commemorate their trip. On Sunday afternoon, when it was time for him to go back to Munich, she said, "I want to thank you, Zacharias. You didn't have to go, but I'm glad you did. I had a great time with you here." "Me too. I'll admit I was hesitant at the start, and it was entirely my fault, but it was a great weekend. Thank you for inviting me." He hesitated to ask what he was thinking about but decided to. "When did you say you would return to Munich?" "My train arrives on Wednesday afternoon." "Why?" She saw Zach thinking. "Could you be free on Friday to help with interviews?" "Zachary, I don't know much about MRIs, and we both know I'm not my mother. I don't see how I can be useful." "I know you're not your mother," he said, trying to find a way to convince her to agree. She saw a smile spread across his face before he said, "You said it was a family business. I think it's important to at least hear your opinion about the candidates." "I'll see what I can do," she said, hoping it would be a yes. During the week in Munich, Zach thought about Cassie often. He thought about her business lunches or dinners with the research and development company in Vienna and found himself a little jealous. Why? He had no idea. Still, it was a good weekend. This was exactly what he needed. On Wednesday afternoon, Zach met her at the train station. Cassie was pleasantly surprised. That evening, they had a business dinner with Demetrius and a couple of other people. After dinner, Zach walked Cassie to her hotel. She asked, "Zachary, do you remember the cathedral in Barcelona that you told me about?" "I remember." "Do you have any plans for this weekend?" No, none." She asked, "I know this is last minute, but can I convince you to be my tour guide again for a short weekend in Barcelona?" Since he really enjoyed the last weekend, he replied, "I don't think it will be too hard for you to convince me of almost anything." She smiled at his answer. "Fine, I will arrange tickets and a hotel. Good night, Zacharias." Again, she hugged him and kissed him on the cheek, but this time for longer. "Good night, Cassie." He was starting to like these hugs and kisses. The interviews on Friday morning went well. They invited 4 final candidates and conducted interviews with Cassie and Zach. They then discussed it together and decided to offer the position to a man named Dominic, who was about Zach's age. They sent the other candidates home and took Dominic out to lunch. Everyone was chatting, mixing German and English, when Frank's cell phone rang. Zach heard his weekend with Cassie fall apart. Frank said, "Okay, where? Give me the details." "Yes, I'll give them to Zach, he's sitting next to me now." Zach asked, "An emergency?" "Yes, there's one in Belfast." Zach looked at Cassie with a sad smile, and she shrugged. He told her, "Family business." She nodded, "Family business." He turned to Dominic and asked, "I know you haven't had time to think about our offer, but how about you go on the call right now? You can see how we work and make a decision." Dominic agreed, and they prepared to go to the airport together. Zach and Cassie had only a few minutes left before he left. He said, "Sorry, I would really like to go to Barcelona with you." She replied, "It's okay. We will have other opportunities someday." He nodded, thinking that fate was trying to tell him something. The service call went well as usual, and Dominic, who lived in Frankfurt, agreed to join the company in Belfast. Zach thought more about starting a relationship with Cassie. He liked the idea, but he was tormented by the thought that he needed to tell her what he had done to Gerald. He still felt that he had done the right thing and that Gerald, a disgusting man, deserved what happened to him. However, now he needed to tell Cassie about it. He didn't have to do this immediately, but he didn't want to hide anything from her. He cared too much about her, or at least about her as a member of the Ortiz family, to lead her on. Although the past weekend had been a pleasant distraction, he was now once again in a state of serious despondency. He began preparing to close up his apartment and move back to Houston. A week had passed since Cassie's return when his phone rang. "Hello, Zachariah." "Hi, Cassie. How are things in Houston?" "Cool and humid, which is better than the usual hot and humid weather." "I haven't heard from you. I just want to make sure you're okay." He decided that trying to explain why he had tried to kill a man was not meant to be a telephone conversation, so he put it off until later, when he returned to Houston. "Sorry, it's entirely my fault. I really wanted to call, but I've been depressed lately. I'll explain it the next time I see you." "Okay. Well, speaking of the next time I see you, have you already planned your return?" "Plans aren't finalized yet, but I should be home in less than a month. Will I see you when you get back?" She sounded desperate. He felt the same way. They talked for about 30 minutes before they both had to go. Their little conversations continued every few days, although Zach found it harder and harder to engage in them. It all seemed so meaningless to him. Would his feelings prevent him from ever getting married? At the time, he truly believed that what he did to Gerald was justified. He still felt that way, but why was he now so worried that Cassie or any other decent woman wouldn't feel the same way? He thought that his internal arguments were the equivalent of a dog chasing its tail, pretty pointless until you either exhaust yourself or get hurt. Even though he was worried about what was going on between him and Cassie, he was glad to be back in Houston and see his family, including the Ortiz family. On Friday, when he returned to Houston, everyone he cared about was waiting for him at the airport, including his sister and her family and Gabriella, but not Cassie. Big hugs for everyone, and they all had dinner at Zach and Daniel's parents' house. Gabriella loved watching Zach interact with his little nieces and nephews. At the end of the evening, he walked Gabriella to her car. The two of them were outside when he asked, "How's Cassie?" "I think she's confused and maybe a little annoyed. She's not sure where your head is right now." "Do you know where your head is right now?" "No, not really. I keep coming back to that meeting we had after I found out about Lisa's betrayal and what I did after that." Gabriella said, "You mean what we did? You had help." "You're right, I did. But I'm not going to keep any secrets from someone with whom I can have a serious relationship. I can very easily see myself being serious about Cassie. How can I have this conversation with her or anyone else? Can you imagine me saying, 'Hey, I plan to kill a man. Turns out I didn't kill him, but he was crippled for life. He's a real idiot, so he deserved it. Do you still want to date or get married to me?' See what I mean?" Gabriella still thought they had done the right thing, but she understood his concern. "Zachary, just talk to her. I think mitigating circumstances justify your actions, but you need to discuss this with her. After a while, I think she'll be fine." Zach replied, "She may or may not be. It's true, maybe it won't be, but you won't know until you try. I hope you try. I have a feeling this conversation will be harder than my last one with Lisa." "Do not think so. Cassandra is a very mature young lady, but she can't read your mind. Make sure your actions speak volumes about your intentions." He sighed. "I don't know what my intentions are at the moment." She touched his face with her hand. "I understand that, but your decision to do nothing will still be perceived by others as a choice. Thank you, Mrs. Ortiz. Thank you for coming. Tell Sam I'll see him on Monday. I'll pass it on. What about Cassie?" "I'll call her." "Fine. Take care, young man." As he watched her drive away, he didn't feel very young. He tried to call Cassie the next day, but she didn't answer. He tried again the next day, but she still didn't respond. At the office on Monday, he waited until lunchtime to check her office. Her door was open, and she was sitting at her desk. When he knocked on the door frame, he saw the snow globe on her desk, which made him smile. He started, "Hello." Coldly, she replied, "Hello. How are you? What do you need, Zach?" Clearly, she was still annoyed. "I wanted to apologize. My condition hasn't been good since you left, and it's my fault, not yours." She said, "I really enjoyed our time together and was looking forward to going to Barcelona. If I understood the situation correctly, I thought you would too, and then you completely changed. Can you explain why?" "I can, but not now." "Well, until then, I don't think we have anything to talk about right now. I have things to finish." It really hurt her to tell him that, but she didn't want to get involved in a relationship with someone who couldn't understand his own feelings for her because it would lead to disappointment. Zach stood up to leave. "I really enjoyed our time together," he said. She asked, "Could you close the door when you leave?" He did as she asked. She didn't want anyone to see the tears in her eyes. For the next few months, there was almost no communication between Zach and Cassie. Zach couldn't bring up what he had done to Gerald because he knew that when he did, Cassie would probably reject him. On the other hand, until he discussed this with her, she continued to reject him. Gabriella looked at Zach with increasing sadness. It pained her to watch two people she loved so much build a wall between them before they had a chance. There were rumors in the office that Cassie was dating a doctor whom her older brother had introduced her to. Zach began to wonder how much longer he could work at McDye, 1 year, 2. He was sad to think that he might have to leave the company where he had worked for 12 years, his entire professional life which began in college. Did he want to continue putting his efforts into a company where he felt the future was becoming more and more untenable? Since Cassie and Tom would likely gain more responsibilities as time went on, he didn't think they would ever hold a grudge against him. But his time around Cassie lately had been short, abrupt, and downright tense. On a Wednesday afternoon in early May, Gabriella walked into Zach's office. "Honey, can you come to Sam's office at 5 o'clock in the evening for a couple of minutes? We want to talk to you." "Of course, Mrs. C. Ortiz. I will be there." Now he wondered if they were going to fire him. At 5 p.m., he entered Sam's office. As he walked in, Cassie walked out. She was dressed very nicely, too nicely for work. Apparently, she had either an event or a date. The very thought of it depressed him. "Hey, Zach," she said as she passed him at the door. "Hi, Cassie." Then he thought, less than a year. Definitely. He didn't think he could last a whole year. He would need to prepare his resume. "Close the door, Zach," Sam said. He closed it, and as almost 4 years ago, they sat around the coffee table. Gabriella did not look as determined and uncompromising as usual, she mostly looked sad. Sam began, "Zach, as your employer, I can't ask you to do what I'm about to say. As your friend, I hope you do this. You know that Gabby is on the board of a local charity that helps homeless women get back on their feet. She provides them with a place to stay, food, and clothing while they receive an education or learn a skill. The first group of women in this new program graduates this Saturday. That evening, the charity organizes a small event in their honor to celebrate their achievements. All the senior managers of our company and their spouses are invited, and Gabby also invited all of our children. She and I consider you part of this group and want you to come too. It's not black tie, but it would be preferable if you wore a suit or sports jacket and tie." Gabriella smiled and said, "Please wear your best suit." Sam rolled his eyes. She continued, "A couple of months ago, I was hoping that Cassandra would be your companion. To my disappointment, it didn't work out that way. Most single people will probably bring companions, but I've already stopped Cassandra from bringing anyone. I hope you don't bring anyone either, but based on our conversation a couple of months ago, I suspect you won't. What Sam and I ask you to do is talk to her on Saturday night after the event. I know this will be difficult for you, but please do this for me. I'm afraid we'll lose you if you don't." He tried to interrupt Mrs. Ortiz. She continued, "No, Zachariah, I know it's true. You don't look at me the same way you used to. Before you left for Germany, I always saw love and admiration in your eyes. Now all I see is sadness. This is killing me. Can you honestly say that you haven't thought about leaving the company?" There was a long pause before he answered, "No, I haven't started looking yet, but this thought has crossed my mind." Gabriella took out a handkerchief and dabbed her eyes. "I suspected it," she sighed heavily. "Remember when we sat here a little over 4 years ago and you showed us this beautiful ring you bought for Lisa?" He nodded. "What was my reaction?" He replied, "It was not what I expected. It wasn't because I wasn't happy that you found love, because I was happy for you. My reaction was because I thought, well, I hoped you'd take a little longer to fall in love with Cassandra. She is so special, and you are so special. I know that you would make a wonderful couple. I thought that time had already run out then, and now I am again afraid that time is running out. I don't think she's serious with that doctor, but I'm afraid the gap between you two continues to grow. So we ask you, as a friend, as a member of our family, please talk to her. Please. Mrs. Ortiz, what if she doesn't want to talk to me? And what if she rejects me because of what I did? Then you will do everything you can, but it won't work. At least you can look back on this time in your life and know that you did the right thing. Can you say that you have done the right thing in the last 3 months? Can you look me in the eye and tell me that you have been doing everything right for the last 3 months? He felt ashamed as he whispered, "No." Sam said, "Zach, we still think what you did to Gerald was right. I suspect you had so much heat and anger at the time that it wasn't that difficult. Even now, almost 9 months later, I'm sure we could all sit down and look at your private investigator's file on the destruction he left behind and make the same decision. We don't know how your conversation with Cassie will end, and I can imagine that you're feeling unsure about that. But compare that solution to this one. If you can do this, then I know you can do this. I don't want to see you go work for someone else, Zach, but if you do, I'll understand." Zach said, "You might think I'm crazy for asking this question, but I feel like I have to ask it. You know your daughter. If I tell her everything, and I do mean everything, if she reacts badly, or should I say, if she thinks I did something wrong, do you think she will report it to the police? I would prefer that my accomplices not fall under this." Gabriella was about to answer when Sam made an unusual gesture, interrupting her by squeezing her hand. "I can't say for sure, Zach, but I hope we raised her to see that you did what you thought was right, which we all thought was right. Even if she doesn't agree with it, she should respect it enough not to rat you out. I suspect that if she tells the police everything, they will still have a hard time proving anything with your strong alibi, lack of evidence, and a scene that cannot be investigated further." Ortiz said what they wanted to say. Now it was Zach's turn. Zach stood up to leave and said, "I'll do my best. This I can promise you. I have no idea how this will end." Sam stood up and shook Zach's hand. "I know what you will do. I believe in you. I have believed for a long time." Gabriella stood up and hugged him tightly. "I love you, Zachariah. I will always love you." He replied, "I love you too." He was so sad at that moment. It was as if he expected to lose part of his family, and perhaps he did. He spent the entire Friday evening discussing with Daniel and Gina. Although he tried to convince them that she was not like her mother and was unlikely to accept what he had done, they continued to tell him that he needed to do this so that he could move on. 6 months of suffering in Germany, then a week of hope followed by another 3 months of pain. He couldn't go on like this anymore. He definitely agreed with this. Zach was incredibly nervous on Saturday. He arrived at the event a few minutes early. It was held in a hotel next to the shelter where the women lived. The grand ballroom was divided into smaller spaces, and there seemed to be 10 tables with 8 chairs each. When he arrived, Sam was already waiting for him. "Hey, Zach. Glad you came." "Me too. Is everyone here already?" "No, so far we have a little more than half of the guests, but soon we expect a full room. We have assigned seats, so graduates are spread throughout the room. Otherwise, we were afraid they would all gather at one table. Let me show you your seat." Sam led Zach into the ballroom to a table next to the performance podium. The only person at the table he recognized was Cassie. Zach's seat was 1 seat away from Cassie, and there was a high chair next to him, which he found odd. "Hi, Cassie." She was wearing a very beautiful dark blue dress. "Hi, Zach." While it wasn't exactly warm, it wasn't the cold curt greeting like before. He didn't know anyone else at the table. A few minutes later, Gabriella brought a pretty young woman who looked to be in her early 20s, and her little daughter, who he thought was 3 or 4 years old, to the table. The woman was wearing a beautiful knee-length black dress, and the little girl was also wearing a beautiful new colorful dress. Gabriella said, "Hello, everyone. I would like to introduce you to the star of this table for tonight. This is Melody. She just graduated with an associate's degree in accounting, and this beautiful little angel is her daughter, Bella. Isn't that an appropriate name, Zachariah? I entrust them to your care." Bella was the only child at the event. He was surprised by such a request but tried to fulfill it. Her mother sat next to Cassie, and Bella sat next to him. He introduced himself to both of them, as did everyone else at the table. Bella, sitting in her chair, was not shy. She told Zach all about her mom, where they lived, the new orphanage they were building nearby, Mom's new job, the new dresses they were wearing, and the new used car, and so on and so forth. Zach really liked her. She was a funny little girl and made almost the entire table laugh. Cassie said, "You're a real salesman, Melody." "Don't I know it?" I used to try to hold her back, but I realized it was better to let her exhaust herself. The others at the table laughed. For dinner, everyone had a choice of chicken parmesan, spinach cheese manicotti, or filet mignon. Soon, the food and drinks arrived, and Bella was ready to eat too. She was nibbling on her breadstick when they brought her the manicotti, which she really liked, until she saw Zach's filet. She tugged at her mother's sleeve and said, "Mom, can I have a piece of steak?" Her mom had chosen chicken, and Cassie had chosen manicotti. Before Melody could respond, Zach suggested, "If it's no problem for you, I can give her some of mine." "I don't mind." "Please, Mom, please," Melody's look at Zach said. "Sorry," Melody said. "Just a couple of bites, Bella. He needs to eat too." "Fine then," turning to her new friend, she said without invitation, "Thank you, Mr. Zach." She was too charming. Zach happily cut off a decent chunk of meat and began cutting it into tiny, toddler-friendly pieces, like he'd seen his sister do for her kids many times. Bella was very good with her fork and had good manners for her age. While her mother might have been one of the stars of the evening, Bella was definitely the hit at the table. After dinner and before dessert, Gabriella came to the podium and asked the new graduates to join her. She gave a short speech highlighting the achievements of the 8 women who graduated that evening. Each had either been homeless or abused less than 3 years ago. Every woman standing near the podium was recognized and applauded for their efforts. Almost all of them had already found work. There were several races among them, and with the exception of Melody, most of the women looked to be in their 30s, but a few looked older. One of them looked to be Gabriella's age. After the ceremony, the dessert carts rolled out, and Bella's eyes were the size of saucers. Melody let Bella choose her own dessert. When the coffee arrived, Bella asked, "Can I have a drink?" When the waiter listed the drinks for the kids, Zach asked, "Can your chef make hot chocolate?" This caught Bella's attention. Her pleading eyes turned to her mother, making everyone except Melody chuckle. Melody sighed and said, "1 hot chocolate, please." Zach added, "Make it 2, please. And I have a favor to ask." He beckoned to the waiter and whispered a few instructions to him. The waiter nodded and returned to the kitchen. Zach told Bella to be patient because it takes time to do everything well. "Does your mom ever braid your hair?" he asked. She nodded. "It takes time to make them look beautiful, right?" More nods. "It's the same with hot chocolate. It takes a few minutes, but it should be worth it." Meanwhile, Bella enjoyed her warm chocolate and peanut brownie topped with whipped cream while waiting for the hot chocolate. Slow dance music started playing, and Sam asked Gabriella to dance. Soon, several other senior managers were also dancing with their spouses. Zach wondered if this was mandatory. Zach leaned over to his new partner in crime and asked Bella, "Ask Mom if we can dance." Melody looked at Zach strangely but allowed him to take Bella to the dance floor. He asked her to stand with her feet on his legs, and he held her hands as they circled around the hall. They had quite a large audience, including a smiling Gabriella, Sam, and those sitting at his table. A few minutes later, he whispered in her ear again, and she nodded in response. Zach picked Bella up and brought her back to the table. He told Melody, "She wants you to dance with us." Melody smiled at this man who was suddenly interested in her daughter. Zach saw his brother-in-law do this with his sister and their daughter once. He hoped he would succeed too. With Bella on his left side holding Melody's right hand, he kept his right hand on Melody's waist and her left hand on his shoulder. They clearly weren't Fred and Ginger, but Bella seemed to be enjoying herself. Zach spent most of his time talking to the adorable Bella. Melody looked at Zach most of the time they talked while they danced and learned that Melody would be working in the accounting department of McDye. She was very excited and nervous. Zach said, "Did you know Gabriella used to work in accounting there?" "I know. She and Mr. Ortiz interviewed together." This made Zach smile. "Yes, they are 2 of the most wonderful people I have ever known. I think you'll enjoy working there." He thought for a moment about how long he would work there. He also learned that Melody was looking for a daycare center for Bella that would be close to McDye. Zach was confident that Mindy's Montori school could help with this. He might even be able to get a company or charity, or a combination of both, to support the school. The school also offered scholarships for those who had difficulty paying. After a few minutes of dancing, they heard, "Can I intervene?" It was Cassie. Zach said to Bella, "I see our hot chocolate on the table." It worked, and she happily led her disappointed mother back to the table. After they danced together in silence for a minute, Cassie asked, "Are you trying to make me jealous?" "What?" "No, I wouldn't do that. I just wanted to be kind to Bella so her mom could rest." "I know, I'm kidding. You were very kind. I think you made too good an impression." After a few seconds of thought, he decided, "I don't understand. Over the past 2 months, I haven't received a single hint that you might be jealous." She paused before answering, "Well, I'm jealous. I love seeing this side of you." Zach was confused for a moment longer. She continued, "You hurt me, Zaria. It was only 1 weekend, but I can't tell you how much I was looking forward to the next one. When you closed yourself off from me, I was depressed. If you don't believe me, you can ask my mom and dad. It took him a while to find the answer. I know, and I knew it while I was doing it. I am so sorry. I hated myself all this time, but I had a reason that I would like to tell you later, after this event, if you allow me. I'll tell you the whole dirty truth, and then you'll have a reason not to talk to me. I am a grown woman, Zaria. I think I can handle it. He desperately hoped so. She squeezed the hand she was holding and led him back to the table, where Bella was with a chocolate mustache and whipped cream. Gabriella watched them dance, enjoying the fact that her plans seemed to be working. Sam said, "It was quite clever to put Bella and Melody next to Zach. Are you proud of yourself, Gabby?" "Oh, shut up. We haven't won the game yet, but it looks like the direction is changing in our favor." Sam kissed his cunning wife tenderly, knowing that she wasn't particularly fond of public displays of affection. She was in such a good mood that she didn't complain. Continuing the entertainment, Zach pretended to drink thick, sweet hot chocolate to get a mustache, causing Bella to giggle. As the evening drew to a close, Bella began to doze off, which was Melody's signal that it was time to leave. "Thank you, Zach, for entertaining Bella tonight. I can see that she really liked it." "It was my pleasure, Melody. You should bring her to the office from time to time. I would love to see her, and important people like Cassie and her parents would too. Can I help you carry her to the car?" She hadn't noticed Cassie's jealousy until she joined in the dance, but she realized it now. Not wanting to irritate the CEO's daughter, she smartly but kindly refused. A few minutes later, Zach walked over and whispered to Cassie, "Are you here with your parents?" She nodded. "Can I take you somewhere so we can talk?" She nodded again. Zach approached Ortiz and said, "Cassie agreed for me to drive her since she came with you. I just wanted to notify you." Sam was quite reserved, but Gabriella, in true finishing school manners, looked pleased and nodded in agreement. After Zach left their table, Gabriella was beaming with happiness. Sam said, "You are triumphant," barely able to contain his glee. Gabriella responded coldly and hoarsely, "I know." He asked, "Do you realize that if everything goes according to your plan, he will probably stay at her place for the night?" She said, "I trust our daughter to do the right thing. If spending the night with him is the right thing to do, I have no problem with it." He laughed. "You surprise me sometimes." She kissed him on the cheek and said, "I need to keep you on your toes." In the car, Zach said, "My current place is my parents' house, so it's either the restaurant, your place, or this car. It's up to you to choose." She said, "I think I prefer my place." They drove west from downtown, past Rice University in the Galleria, toward the general area where almost all of the McDye employees lived. The conversation was fairly low-key, mostly about how great the event was and how amazing the charity was to help these women and those preparing to graduate next year. When he arrived at her house, he saw that she had a beautiful but small townhouse that looked relatively new. When he got out of the car, he took the detective folder that was lying on the back seat. As they walked in, she asked, "Do you want something to drink?" "No thanks. I need all my brain cells for this, although I reserve the right to kill most of them later." She poured herself a glass of wine and they sat down in her living room. With a hand gesture, she said, "Okay, the stage is yours." He asked, "What do you know about my divorce from Lisa?" "Aha, this is not an interrogation. This is your story." He sighed heavily. "Fine. It might take some time." He told her everything from the night they first met to falling in love. He explained her strange behavior when he returned from trips, her reluctance to play the violin, and how Mindy's pregnancy sparked Lisa's interest in possibly starting a family. He then told her about the call from his brother, the photograph in the newspaper, and the detective's report. "I brought the report on the man so you can see what kind of person he is. I can point to 2 lives he ruined, plus several others he hurt. He leaves a trail of suffering wherever he appears. I don't understand why he was so celebrated before." Poison was a curious word, but he continued, "Fine. So on that basis, here's what happened. Like I said, this man is poisonous. He has hurt countless people, pushed one woman over the edge, not to mention what he did to Lisa. On top of destroying her love of music, he was complicit in the destruction of my marriage. I wanted him to be punished for crimes for which he would never be convicted and for which some even praised him. Call it what you want, revenge, retribution, justice, or whatever. With the help of a few other people, we came up with a plan to get justice for him and keep me out of jail. This didn't quite go according to plan. Please never reveal the names of my accomplices. Your mother and father supposedly sent me on a trip abroad. My brother went on that trip instead of me because I was supposed to be the one to carry out the act. Going through immigration gave me an alibi. He was allegedly working from home that day. I even quickly dropped by his office early in the morning to pick up some files so the security cameras would see him in the office. I caused a gas explosion at Gerald's house. My goal was to kill him, but he must be a strong old man because he survived, badly hurt but alive. This means that even though I'm not technically a murderer, I tried to kill him. My final comeuppance is that Lisa went to Austin with him to help him recover. Why? I don't know, but I know something she doesn't know. I have a tape of him saying things that would probably make her leave him, but I'm punishing her by letting her stay with that poor idiot. After that, I just wanted to leave because I couldn't stand the pity when I was so miserable. Your father allowed me to go to Germany, where I was miserable until the day you showed up. And then, when you left, I was unhappy again, but for a different reason. I wanted to go to Barcelona too, but being in Belfast, I realized that I needed to have this conversation with you. If you were just a date or someone I couldn't have a serious relationship with, it wouldn't matter. But after our time in Vienna, I knew I could have a very serious relationship with you. I didn't want to waste your time on someone you'd probably reject because of what I did. I couldn't build our relationship on a foundation that would hide such a huge secret. He finished, so that's it. All of it. Watching him, she took a long sip of wine and then asked, "Is that all? Is there anything else you need to tell me? I just told you that I tried to kill someone. How can anything else compare to that? What about at school? You and the quarterback?" He narrowed his eyes on her for a moment and asked, "Who told you about this?" She replied, "For someone who knows my family so well, I'm surprised you haven't connected all the dots yet." He sighed and shook his head. "Obviously, you have an advantage over me, and I'm emotionally exhausted. Could you please enlighten this hopeless guy? You know my mother loves you, right? She really does. Do you know how long I've been hearing about you? She wanted you and me to be a couple for a long, long time, long before you met Lisa. There were times when I thought you were interesting and times when I didn't want to hear anything more about you. Ziria, Ziria, Ziria. That's all I heard. Then you got engaged to Lisa. My mother was crushed. Crushed. I went from constantly talking about you to complete silence. Then, after I started working at the company, I started seeing Mom and Dad more often, and you too. Shortly before you left for Germany, I noticed that something was bothering her. Do you remember the night I saw you after dinner with my parents? Then I found out about your divorce. She cried for you when she learned about Lisa's betrayal because she was hurt too. She missed you a lot while you were away and kept asking Daddy to bring you back. When I had to go to Vienna and Munich for work, she asked me to check on you. I didn't care. I'd heard nothing but good things about you for years, so I knew you were a good guy. Almost everyone in the company loves you too. Some people think you're sucking up to my mother, but the people who matter don't think so because you're not sucking up to my dad. We didn't communicate much after I joined the company, but you were always polite and friendly. Consequently, I was wondering who I would see when I came to Germany. Before we left, Mom and Dad sat down to talk to me to prepare me because I had only heard positive things for years, and now they were genuinely concerned about you. They told me everything they knew. I have to admit, I was a little surprised. Believe it or not, I was surprised not so much by them as by you. My parents are strong advocates for family, and their moral code is to always try to do the right thing. Maybe that's why you and she get along so well. After our first day together, it took a lot of willpower for me not to drag you into my room and spend the whole night with you. It would have been the only way to make this day better. Of course, if I did that, we wouldn't have seen much of Vienna. Those few days in Vienna were perfect, and I was already falling in love with you. I promise, if we had gone to Barcelona, we wouldn't have seen the cathedral because I had only booked one room and didn't plan to leave it often. I hope this tells you what I was thinking. He shook his head. I can't believe you knew all this time and could still have feelings for me. She said, I knew, but it was your secret. Like you said, we couldn't start a relationship with such a huge secret, but you had to be the one to reveal it. I was angry and upset because I wanted more, but if you couldn't muster the strength to have this conversation, then we could never be anything. He replied, I'm sorry I hurt you, but I didn't know how to deal with it. Always trust me, and I will always trust you. That's how we will begin. He thought it was a great start. I like the sound of it. So where do we go from here? Well, don't make me jealous anymore by doing such cute things with someone's daughter, she said. I didn't know I could make you jealous at that moment. No more appointments with doctors or anyone else for you, she said. She walked over and sat next to him. I promise it wasn't a real date, but it served its purpose, which was to get back to you and hopefully push you into action. Also, if you and I are to become anything, then you need to be careful about how tightly my mother has you wrapped around her finger. He laughed. It may be difficult, but if it's any consolation, I spent a lot of time while you were in Europe wishing I could have been wrapped around you instead. Is it true? She asked, leaning over to kiss him. It was a nice kiss on the lips. Is it true? He asked. Then he kissed her back enthusiastically, and the feelings they'd shared in Europe weren't just renewed, they exploded. It was a good thing no one could see into her house. Although they both cared about each other, there wasn't much love there at the moment. After lunch, her phone rang. She saw from the caller ID that it was Gabriella. She laughed and said, My mom is testing me. It's almost surprising she didn't call you. She answered the phone, Hi, Mom. How are you? Everything is fine, thank you. Have you and Zachariah managed to discuss everything? Yes, I think we decided to give it a try. She winked at Zach. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Can you two join us for dinner tomorrow night? I think I can find a way to convince him to come, but I need to call Zachariah first. She heard a disappointed O through the phone. Cassie called out, Hey, Zachariah, can we have dinner with my parents tomorrow? After a short pause, Gabriella said, You feel very confident, don't you, Cassandra? Yes, I'm glad. Very, very glad. Give my love to your new man. I'm going as often as he can. She definitely wasn't her mother. Zach knew it would be fun. About a month later, early one morning, Zach was in Austin at a rehab center, waiting for a quick visit. When he learned that Gerald would be in therapy, he took a large bag from the trunk of the car and entered the waiting room where Lisa was sitting. She looked much older than he remembered. She had lost several kilograms, and her brown hair was not as well groomed as when they were married. First of all, she looked very, very tired, as if something or someone had sucked the life out of her. Good morning, Lisa. Zach, what are you doing here? Wait a minute, if you're here to gloat, don't worry, I know how I ended up here. No, Lisa. I didn't come to gloat. I came to apologize and to forgive you. I don't think I deserve your forgiveness. But an apology for what? He asked. Not long after we last saw each other in the hospital, I learned something I could have shared with you earlier, but I decided not to. A good friend convinced me to do the right thing and forgive you. We hope that what I am about to tell you will help you. Do you want to help me? He replied, Yes. I need you to listen to this recording. You'll understand when you're done. Zach played the recording of his conversation with Gerald for her. It didn't last long. Her reaction afterward was not what he expected. She wasn't angry either at Gerald for what he said or at him for not sharing it sooner. Her expression was simply sad. She asked, Why bring this to me now? You could have let me spend the rest of my life or his life taking care of him. Because I met someone I deeply respect. She reminded me that it is always important to do the right thing, even when no one is looking. I know it. I don't care that I hurt Gerald. He deserved it. But because I love you, I shouldn't let him keep hurting you. She said, I always suspected that you caused the gas explosion, but I wasn't going to try to prove it. This statement made it clear to Zach that her help to Gerald was more out of duty than out of love. He then thought better of what he was going to say. Not wanting to focus on what he had done, he changed course. I plan to wait 3 years before sharing this with you. That's how long we've been married. I was given to understand that over the years, you have already paid a very high price for your relationship with him. You've suffered enough. Do you remember hearing about the young girl who committed suicide after his devastating review of her performance? What if he had done this to you after our divorce? He doesn't care about anything or anyone. All he does is use people to make himself look better. He uses you to make himself look better because you are beautiful, and people see you with him. Don't let him take advantage of you anymore. He doesn't deserve you, and you've let him continue to hurt you when he doesn't care about you or your music. All that matters to him is himself. However, my family, our families, care about you and want you to get rid of him because he is hurting you. It would be terrible if he could turn you into someone like him. Lisa wondered how much of her life she had spent on this sad man. How had she allowed herself to be deceived so easily and for so long? His sarcasm was not some kind of enlightenment, it was simply a sense of superiority that he felt and that others supported. For some reason, many Texas newspapers allowed his family background, his teaching position, and his witty comments to help sell newspapers. Remembering the young girl who committed suicide, she realized that she was one of many who contributed to it. He enjoyed hurting others and putting them in their place, just as he did to her. She allowed it to happen and even encouraged it from time to time. She wouldn't let this happen anymore. She looked at Zach, whom she loved so much. She still loved him, and a tear rolled down her cheek. She asked, "What's in the bag?" "This is from my entire family to you. I don't know why you left it, but I hope you love it again and think kind thoughts about us when you use it." He took her violin case out of the bag, and she couldn't hold back any longer. Her parents had paid a small fortune for the violin when it won first place in the Houston Youth Orchestra. They were so proud. She left it because she knew she would never play it next to Gerald. She burst into tears and hugged Zach as she cried for all the lost years, the lost music, and the lost marriage. He didn't resist or try to push her away. He hugged her and held her until she calmed down. He really hoped that she could get her life back on track away from that man. After a few minutes, when she had calmed down, she said, "I have to go. I don't know where, but I'm leaving him. I'm sorry that I hurt you so much that you decided to do what you did to him and let me stay with him knowing what you know. I will always regret that I hurt you. Thanks for coming, Zach. I will always love you." She took the case, walked out the door, and drove away. He loved her too. A week after, Zach returned to Houston, and Miriam visited Lisa, learning that she had left Gerald. In fact, she never saw him again, and he never got out of his wheelchair. The reason Miriam went to her was because she wanted Lisa to teach her children how to play the violin. Lisa initially refused but was eventually persuaded by Miriam, her husband, and children. She remembered how much Zach's family had praised her playing early in their relationship and how much joy she could bring to others through playing or teaching. She regretted that she had not listened to them earlier. Her renewed love for music and teaching helped Lisa greatly. Seeing the smiles on the children's and Miriam's faces brought a smile to her face as well. She became friends with Miriam and her family, who helped her immediately after leaving Gerald. They even encouraged her to reconnect with Mindy and Robert. She apologized to Robert for involving Mindy in her affair. They accepted her apology and invited her to meet their daughter. It was a good meeting. She regretted that she had missed so much over the past year. She eventually returned to Houston and, with a little help, began the transition to teaching violin full-time. She also sought help from her therapist at the hospital to understand why she had allowed Gerald to influence her so much. After regaining her playing skills, she even played occasionally with the Houston Symphony Orchestra and recruited a few of her colleagues to play for a new charity that had started operating in Houston called the Wow Foundation. Zach and Cassie got married. Of course, at the reception, while dancing with Gabriella, Zach said, "Mrs. Ortiz, I was born in the South and raised by strict Southerners, so I don't think I could ever call you Gabriella. However, if you allow it, it would be an honor for me to call you Mom." Hearing this, her eyes filled with pride and tears. She kissed him on the cheek and said, "I've been wanting to hear this from you for a long time." The newlyweds spent their honeymoon in Vienna, exploring even more of the city and its attractions, feeling right at home. Over time, they had 3 children, who were adored by both sets of grandparents. The new products they developed sold very well in the market. They were so successful that one of the megacorporations they competed with ended up purchasing a stake in the company to sign an exclusive marketing and resale agreement. A large portion of the money from the sale was used to fund a charitable foundation that Gabriella founded but which Cassie later took over. Sam said he would only agree to donate money to the fund if he could name it. He named it the Walking on Water Foundation because, like Zach, he really believed his wonderful wife could walk on water and thought it would be a good name for a charity. A few years later, after signing the agreement and receiving large amounts of money, Sam handed over management of the company to Zach. Over the years, Zach had earned this right, helping not only to grow the MRI services business but also to manage the growth of many new products. Alas, they lost Sam in his 75th year. He had an aneurysm one night and didn't wake up. But Gabriella was there when he left, which would have been his wish. After Sam's death, Cassie began helping her mother with the foundation and eventually took over its day-to-day management. The foundation's primary goal was to help homeless and abused women in Houston. They built a new, larger building to house needy women and their children, aiming to change their lives. The old building was converted into a Montessori school serving children from birth to 6th grade, allowing women to continue their education or vocational training. Mindy was hired to run the school. Like its predecessor charity, the foundation helped clothe and feed the women who passed through its doors as they worked to gain the skills needed to avoid returning to the streets or abusive relationships. They also helped them start a new life by assisting with the purchase of a reliable used car, work clothes, and finding a new home or sharing one with another graduate. The model was so successful that it was adopted in several other cities. Now, Cassie is being honored for her leadership of the WOW Foundation, which her parents founded. Lisa was able to persuade several of her colleagues and students to come and play for a good cause, compensating for the pain that Gerald had caused and that she and others had allowed. She felt the need to write inspirational articles for the Houston newspaper, praising and supporting the efforts of the city's musicians and encouraging patrons to provide positive reviews and support the development of youth programs for young musicians. She continues to receive nice letters from those who appreciate her kind words, including former conductors who have performed there. Mindy sang at charity events for her friends and rarely turned down an invitation. Her eldest daughter was one of those who played the violin that evening. Bella played too. Her mother, Melody, eventually married Cassie's younger brother Tom, and they were incredibly happy together. After speaking, applauding, and thanking many people for coming, Cassie finally walked over to where her husband and mom were talking. Of course, they always talked. She was sure that he loved her mother more than even her brothers, and that said a lot. She asked, "Mom, why is it that whenever I leave Zachariah for more than a few minutes, you're always there with him when I return?" She replied, "Because I thought I lost him once, and I would never let it happen again." Zach added, "You'll never have to worry about that, Mom, because ever since she saved me from my isolation in Vienna, Cassandra has had my heart. No matter where I am, I will always come back to her and my family." What do you think of our final installment of the story? In my opinion, it's a story with a not-so-pleasant ending on the husband's part. What do you think about both parts? Write your opinion in the comments. Till new videos.